Sativa versus Indica. What is the science of the difference between them? I'm Lex Pelger. I do Can Education for CVResearch, the makers of Plus CBD. On cannabis, ask me anything. To begin with my caveat, I'm a biochemist who pays attention to this stuff for my newsletter, Cannabinoids and the People, but I am no expert on the different cultivars of cannabis. For pretty much my entire adult life, what has been available to me has been weed. And I just buy weed. There has been no different types that I could get. That being said, there is a good bit of science on this question of indica versus sativa. The basic answer to this question is nothing. There's no longer any difference between indica and sativa. That might have meant something a long time ago, but with the interbreeding of the last 100 years, it doesn't. Dr. Daniela Vergara, who was on my podcast, The Lex Files, years ago, did a big study about this, and looking at the phenotypes of cannabis, like how bush they are, how tall they are, all that stuff that you used to say was indica versus sativa, that no longer has any shared genetic basis. So you can't look at a plant and know what it is, for one. More to the effects of how they feel, there was this study where they looked at 100 different samples, and they found that what was labeled sativa and indica were genetically indistinct. You couldn't tell which was which from the genes. The only thing that seemed to be different between them was their terpene synthase genes, so the genes about making terpenes. That makes sense because what we generally think of when we say indica is the myrcene terpene, the most sedative terpene, the couch lock terpene. And so that's usually where the sedation is coming from things we call indica. And for sativa, maybe it's limonene, maybe it's some of the other terpenes, but in general, it's the terpenes that are giving this flavor and changing the psychoactive effects. It doesn't seem to be cannabinoids, and whatever sativa and indica used to mean, they no longer mean anything else. You can see the famed cannabis scientist, Dr. Ethan Russo, talking about the debate right here, and he ends it with simply, this doesn't mean anything anymore. And he points out what's known to anyone who's looking at this stuff. We can't even determine if it's one species or not. There's been a debate for 150 years whether cannabis is one species with 3 subspecies. Is it 3 species? Is it something in between? All of these lines are too fuzzy to be useful. If you talk to someone into genetics of this plant, they would say that there might be 4 to 7 different genetic locuses that the plant revolves around. And that is those different gene pools out there. But as far as this 1 to 2 indica sativa, that doesn't exist. There are genetic families within the plant, but even where you draw the lines for those genetic families is still up in the air. So sativa and indica really don't mean anything, and the best thing you can do is get to know your terpene profiles if you have that opportunity. For me, all I can get is weed.